everyone. I guess we can start. It's 12 o'clock here in Tunis. It must be a different time in your respective time zone. So good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending on where you are. We are here for this month's web debate, which is called "Can Diplomacy Be Learned on the Job Only?" And last month we focused on the question of whether diplomacy can be learned from the books, and we looked at the importance of the interaction between academic and diplomatic communities and the very large relevance of interdisciplinary studies to better understand diplomacy and its role in society. And now we are shifting from the books to the field, to the other end of the spectrum in a way, and ask the question, can diplomacy be learned on the job only? So in some countries, on-the-job training for diplomats is becoming increasingly important, while the length of formal training programs is becoming shorter and shorter. And maybe we can even identify a trend that signals an increased relevance for on-site learning. And throughout this debate, we will focus on these dynamics between traditional training for diplomats, online learning, and on-the-job training. What are the possibilities and best practices in on-the-job training? What are the challenges of focusing maybe too much on workplace learning? And how can diplomats best be prepared for the developments of today's dynamic and quickly changing diplomatic environment? So to discuss this topic with us, we have two excellent speakers. First of all, we have Dr. Cecilia Monata. I think she's in the window below, but maybe that's only on my screen, from the University of Geneva, and she will talk about what workplace learning entails and how it interacts with more formal types of learning. And she will also highlight some of the important conditions that need to be in place for workplace learning to be effective. And then we have with us Dejan Dincic, who is DiploFoundation's former technical director and in charge of supporting different types of online learning programs. Dejan will look at flexible learning formats from a more educational policy and politics point of view, and he will share his experiences of training diplomats on the job from Diplo's perspective. So each of them will have about 5 to 10 minutes to share their knowledge. And afterwards, we will dive into a hopefully very lively and interactive debate. And I think most of you are already very familiar with the format of the web debate, but I'll just highlight that if you feel any questions popping up in your head, please write them down in the chat window below and I will take note of them. So with that said, I think Cecilia, you can go ahead.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Barbara. I'm really happy to be here today with you to speak about workplace learning and diplomacy learning on the job. So actually, I'm not an expert on diplomacy, and I'm an expert on adult learning. I'm a researcher at the University of Geneva, as you said, and I'm working more specifically on the conditions supporting workplace learning, and that's a bit what I'm talking about today. So workplace learning actually is a major concern in organizations today. Workplace learning is deemed necessary because of economical reasons, because of pedagogical reasons. Transport is easier. Learning can be lived, experienced in the workplace. So everything seems to be good to be learning in the workplace. But the workplace learning only is not, from my point of view, sufficient either. Workplaces are not always organized to improve learning in terms of affordances, community of practices, and many other kind of conditions we will speak about today. And workplaces do not always fulfill neither an essential condition to learning, like be free to be wrong. So all that make us say that workplace and formal training are complementary for learning a profession. There is actually no opposition. Each one has some strong point and some weak point, and the combination of them can be very helpful for learning. So the key question is how to optimize work environments to make them safe, effective, and efficient learning environment, and how can we combine those environments to more formal training, So it seems to me that the issue of workplace learning for diplomacy, for what I've understood, but you will let me know if I'm wrong, is how to train in a certain way people having different kind of diplomas to become diplomats, so initial training, how to train in-service diplomats to improve their practice, so continuing training, and how to train experienced diplomats to become trainers and teachers. Those three questions seems to me very important if we want to think about workplace learning for diplomacy. So maybe before we have to clarify in a certain extent very, very quickly what is learning and what is learning in the workplace. So learning is very superficial, what I'm going to say. So for all of you, it's maybe it seems very basic. So learning is construction of a new procedural and declarative knowledge. So there is a changing that is in process. But learning is also routinization, repetition of procedural and declarative knowledge. So when we think about diplomacy on the job, training of diplomacy on the job, we have to think how we can facilitate and support the construction of new knowledge, and how can we facilitate and support the routinization of newly acquired knowledge. So to think about that, we have to keep in mind that the research, the studies today tell us that there are 4 major learning modalities in the workplace. Imitation, learning by imitating people through observation. I'm not going into details. If questions will come, I will go into details of each one of these modalities, but I think it will take too much time now. So imitation, learning by doing, trial and error, that's quite well known, verbal transmission, and reflective thinking. So here too, how can we support in a certain way, how can we facilitate this kind of modalities? To what extent formal training and workplace environment are likely to support and integrate the use of observation, the use of verbal transmission, the use of experience, the use of reflective thinking for learning purpose. So all that is to show you that it's quite a complex issue, learning. And as far as the workplace is a complex context, already to ensure the process is not maybe so easy. More specifically on workplace learning, today we distinguish 3 basic ingredients. And I'm thinking about the works of Billet, who works a lot on workplace learning. The first ingredient is what we call affordances. Those are all the resources that a workplace can offer to the person, like material environment, work activities that are source of learning, guidance and modeling. The second ingredient is individual engagement. It's necessary that the person is moved or learn in a certain way, engaged in their learning. So for that, they need to perceive the value of the activity, and they need to feel self-efficacy to do the activity and to learn in the workplace. And third ingredient, the organization has to ensure the access to learning resources. So participation and learning has to support the participation in community of practice and take into account the power relationships that are present in the workplace, and so on and so forth. So once again, which implication all that has for diplomacy on the job learning? We should ask to what extent does the learner's work environment provide learning opportunities like affordances? To what extent is the learner engaged in training, in the workplace, in a community of practice too? And to what extent does the learner have access to learning opportunities in the workplace? And we really need the three ingredients to ensure learning in the workplace. There is a last thing that I would like to highlight, and it's a very important condition too that has been studied really deeply these last 10 years, and is what we call psychological safety. To learn, as I said before, there is a central assumption that errors, failures, questions, and doubts can be major source of learning in the workplace. But if and only if we can speak about them, talk about them, share them, reflect about them, think all together about them. And this is quite problematic in the workplace because there are real costs of errors and that there are consequences. So psychological safety is a very big question in the workplace, and it's quite difficult to ensure this safety to be wrong and to in order to learn.
Thank you, Cecilia. That was very interesting, and a very interesting perspective from a non-diplomatic angle, which is always good to have. Now I'd like to invite Jan to talk about his experiences with online blended on-the-job learning.
Thank you, Barbara, and thank you, Cecilia, for your introduction. That's very inspiring for me as well. I'd like to start by being a bit provocative. Before I move to practical experience I've gathered while overseeing some of these programs at Diplo. But in my work, mostly on blended and online learning, there is one aspect that we often don't look at. Over the decades and years in distance education, in continuous education, and then in online learning, we've seen a number of movements and fashions, and we had networked learning, connected learning, flexible learning, and you will probably remember many others, most recently with big rise of massive open online learning. But what I think is, and I don't provide answer here, but I think it's just food for thought, is that it's useful to think about the driving forces behind these changes in education. So why do these movements rise, and what is the driving force for each of these approaches? And that we can apply then also for the workplace learning. Just to give a few examples, and maybe unexpected driving forces, one of the main forces behind driving online learning was, for example, military investments a couple of decades ago. Imagine if you have to train 50,000 people on something new, and you have to do it effectively, cost effectively, and also in a fairly uniform way, you would be interested in exploring new ways to train. The other driving forces are sometimes political. Of course, the many forms of training and learning that we use today have been inherited from the industrial age, but the circumstances have changed. The social and economic context has changed. So maybe the industrial methods are not appropriate for today's learning. So there was also that change in the economic and landscape that prompted some of the new approaches to learning. And I think that's enough of small provocation. But when somebody suggests something, a new approach to training in a particular context, maybe it will make you think, why? Why are we doing this? So I think it's good to look at the background. The other thing I would like to say on analyzing one approach to learning versus other approaches is, of course, the answer is always, it depends. It depends on what? It depends on context. And for me, the starting point in exploring any particular approach to learning and format and design of learning for a new activity would be to look at the learning objectives, to look at the audience, to the broader context, and to the learning materials, and to analyze that before I decide what format and what approach to take. There are many tools that can help us in doing this analysis and then help us make the decision. There is one slide here, and Cecilia mentioned this in passing, some of the instruments, but I took this slide. I think people are mostly familiar with this. It's just a part of it. It's not very clear, but it's just a visual anchor to remind you of this. It's the famous Bloom's taxonomy of learning, and just to go through the first part of it is that there are different types of knowledge. Sometimes you need to learn something about something, so it's more question of gathering information and memorizing it. In other situations, you need to learn how to do something, which is then a different type of knowledge. And for each of these different types of knowledge that we aim to acquire, there would be different activities and different pedagogies applied. And the other famous, well-known taxonomy is Gagne's domains of learning, where learning is divided in much broader categories, but it's also something that can be useful for your thinking. And then I'm briefly going to look at, I would like to look at my experience while managing training programs at Diplo for diplomats. And what I saw there over the years, at Diplo, the mostly used format for training of working adults is blended and online learning. In blended, you get a combination of face-to-face, and then you continue with an online learning program, or you have purely online courses. The type of online courses and training that Diplo provides is collaborative. People study in groups of 12 to 25 people in an online classroom. The courses are facilitated, so there would be a course coordinator, there would be a lecturer and a tutor. And the courses are highly interactive. They require real engagement and participation by all the participants. Most of these participants are already working. They could be working diplomats, or they could be new to the diplomatic domain, but have background in other subjects. One thing that I've observed over the years is that when diplomats are in the same group with people with different non-diplomatic backgrounds, that they would often feel a lack of theoretical knowledge. So if you imagine this diplomatic training to be their entry point and the end point on the job learning, I think there is a gap, and that affects people's participation in the program. The other observation I would say is the blend of face-to-face and online learning works well, not just because you're mixing two different approaches in media, but also because typically online courses last longer, and you do them while you stay at work. So you are at your desk, you're dealing with everyday problems. You have opportunity in a well-designed course to bring those everyday problems to the classroom, to discuss with your peers, to discuss with lecturers, and to contextualize them. That effect of having a longer engagement, for example, compared with an intensive 5-day face-to-face workshop off-site, off-work, I think that's a significant difference. And lastly, what I've seen in courses, in this type of collaborative courses that take place over significant periods of time and sometimes are joined in broader capacity development programs with different research and project-based learning phases, is that they definitely support emergence or can support, when well designed, emergence of communities of practice. And with skillful moderation, which is provided by Diplo team, I've witnessed many times, especially for these blended programs, an emergence of real communities of practice that tend to stay alive even when the course is finished, because the participants from different environments find their common language, their common tools, their common interests, and continue to collaborate or communicate in one form or another in their own work sphere for long periods of time. This support for communities of practice brings me back to I think, one important concept here is that concept of situated learning, of this socially constructed learning. There was some years ago that was quite an innovative approach to learning, moving away from purely theoretical formalized training to something that is where we learn from how people learn in social contexts. And there is this book by Love and Wenger, for example, Situated Learning, Legitimate Peripheral Participation, that I would warmly recommend to anyone interested in this subject of on-the-job learning. It's a very good start and it's an easy read, but it explains some of these key concepts and also how people learn in social contexts and how there are other aspects than pure instrumental knowledge that play an important role in how this knowledge will be applied. And that includes somebody's social position in a particular community and many other aspects. And I think that would be all for my introduction. And back to the debate, back to Barbara.
Thank you, Dejan. That was very interesting, and especially the mix between all the different methods that we can use. We will definitely share this taxonomy on the website, and it would also be good for you to share the exact title and details of this book, and we can include it in a list of resources at the end of the article. I'd like to, before moving on to the questions and the debate, I already see that there's a lively debate, especially about sticks and carrots and benefits in the chat window. But before that, I'd like to share some comments that were sent to us by two former ambassadors who would like to contribute to the debate, but unfortunately could not be here today. The first is a comment from Ambassador Kishan Rana, and he would like to share his view and some examples of on-the-job learning in a diplomatic context. And he shared that, well, of course, on-the-job experience is not enough. And I mean, this is something that we reiterated again and again. It needs to be a very smart combination of different formats. But he says a trend is now emerging in which formal entry training is curtailed. He says that Germany shifted from 2 years to a 1-year program, and India has also halved the time of its foreign service at the Foreign Service Institute to 6 months only. And then he points towards a very interesting example, which is the United Kingdom. The UK's Diplomatic Academy is working on a distance method, but a bit with a twist, as British officials are required to run their own training cycle at a pace they prefer, while working fairly autonomously. And this is a very interesting approach as well, probably, that is maybe more tailored to the specific needs of the different diplomats. And this mirrors the advantages of, this blended experience we talked about, taking a little bit of everything and mixing it together with the right formula. And I'd like to add some thoughts by, if I can find it, Christopher Lamb. And he used to head Australia's Foreign Service back in 1975. And he points out that there is an important distinction to be drawn between those recruited who are young and those who were recruited mid-career in the relevance and effectiveness of the training format. So before we are discussing the questions of the participants, I'd like to ask both of you how to best suit diplomatic training methods to the profile of the participants. Is this even possible, whether they're young or mid-career or have a specific skill set? And would the recruitment of diplomatic candidates be also influenced by the kind of training they will receive, seeing that some forms of training require different skills than others?
Maybe I can answer, and then because I wanted to, before answer 2 questions, I would go in the same way of Dejan. Actually, he said something very, very important that I didn't highlight, is the need of understanding the context, the people, and the content. So it's very difficult for me to answer to the question in a general point of view. For outside saying, okay, there is not one solution that is the solution. There are different solutions that are the best that we can find today according to the context, to the people, and to the organization, and so on and so forth. So there are a lot of parameters. Do we say that in English? A lot of factors that we need to take into account to answer to this question, as there are in any other context, not only diplomacy, but it's the same if I had to answer to medical training or whatever. It's too general, too broad as a question in a certain way, if you see what I mean. And I really wanted to point it out that an analysis of needs is needed in a certain way. So trying to understand what are the skills, very specifically the skills and the knowledge that a diplomat need for this country in this context. It's very essential to answer the question, should we do it on the job or should we do it on
It seems
when we are speaking about workplace learning, the context of workplace, it's quite different according to the organization. So once again, there is no solution for everybody. There are just many solutions that can fit different contexts. So this is the first point I wanted to highlight, and I really thank Dejan for what he said before. So I don't. Can you repeat the questions you said before quickly, Barbara?
Yes.
Yes.
The question was whether. Yeah, exactly.
Yes, about recruitment. It's a very good question. I really think that once again we have to be very careful to have just one solution for different kind of experienced people. And as Dejan said it before, and it was very true, I had the same experience in a completely different context. You cannot propose to very experienced people the same kind of training that you would propose to people that are less experienced or do not have the same degree, because of culture, because of learning culture too, because of a lot of factors. So once again, you can have a look at process of recruitment according to training you are going to offer. But for me, the question is on the other side. It means once you have recruited, what the organization can propose, can offer as a training. And for me, the best an organization can do is to propose something that is not individual. It is not possible to be so precise, but at least to propose 2-3 different paths that will take into account the experience of the person, the needs of the person. I don't know if I answered to your question.
Yes, it's clear, and of course, it makes sense to first recruit the best people and then see how you can even improve their skill sets and knowledge, rather than recruiting people on the basis of what kind of training you are going to provide.
Not only best people, because sometimes, according to the context, you don't have the best people. I don't know in diplomacy, but there are contexts like humanitarian, where you have to hire people that are available because of the emergency, but they are not experienced. So you try to find the answer afterwards.
All right. I'd like to highlight one of the discussions that is going on in the chat window. It is about sticks and carrots and rewards. Stephanie Baldi, he explained that in his experience, to promote individual engagement, it's very important to provide concrete rewards, for example, in terms of career. And Petru Dumitriou responded that these rewards should be handled with care and in combination with other carrots and sticks, to which Stefano Baldi in the end also agreed to. Dejan, maybe, do you have any experience in this regard? Do you think there should be carrots and sticks involved in training, or should it be completely carrot and stick neutral in a sense?
In my experience, one of the key factors for successful training and learning and effective, as Cecilia said, is the engagement. If you can create programs that engage people with the material, with peers, and with the lecturer, that has such a great chance of becoming an effective learning. So that's the goal. Now, how do you get there with sticks and carrots? I don't have enough experience, or at least not insider experience, in being part of a Ministry of Foreign Affairs, part of being diplomatic service, that I think some of our participants in the chat, Kishan and Stefano, could possibly offer, and they are offering some of their experience. I must say I'm a little bit, so without that real insider experience, just by participating in the training part, in the training programs, whether face-to-face or online, and mostly with younger to mid-career diplomats, I'm quite optimistic that carrots should do. But then that's maybe not enough of a reality check, and Stefano and Kishan can give us a proper reality check.
Thank you. We also have a small debate on teaching more experienced diplomats and continuous education on the job. Bhumi shared that in India there is a mid-career training requiring senior diplomats to go for a period of training before they are promoted to higher ranks. And he asked, how can we systematize learning on the job? So how can this be more systematic, continuous experience? Let's see if there are already answers to this question. And otherwise, I would like to invite one of you, if you have any experience on continuous or systematic education to diplomats, also maybe from different countries. Is there some sort of institutional way in which this is done, for example, with the Indian service, or maybe a more continuous basis?
Maybe before that, just to go back to the experience, the idea of mixing experienced people and less experienced people, there is maybe a point that we didn't highlight enough before, and what I said maybe could be taken as wrong when I said it's quite difficult to mix people that have different kind of experience. This is not true in a certain way. It means that we cannot do only that, because needs can be different according to the experience that you have. But it's very interesting to mix people having different kind of experience and different degree and diplomas. So once again, it depends on the way you look at it. It can be pedagogically very interesting to have people that are mixed and they are coming from different backgrounds and academic backgrounds too. It's quite essential. I'm really sorry, there is a something, I don't know if you can hear it. I'm really sorry. So these are an important point. Now, talking about workplace learning and how you can structure it. I think this was the question you asked. How can do that? I don't have experience in diplomacy, but I have experience in other kind of jobs, like for instance, some expertise on medical humanitarian, like emergencies or other kind of speciality. And this can be done working very, very straight with experienced people in the field that become tutor, mentor, or coach, depends, with people that are learning. There are very informal things that can be done too, and I think that the book Dejan showed is very helpful for that. Try to support a community of practices to born and to live in the organizations. It's very important too to structure workplace learning. But I really think we have to think about individual support. So how can we support individual and how can we support groups at the same time? And how the organization can organize their activity in this sense. And it's not always easy to do.
Can I ask something? I would like to ask Cecilia, but also our colleagues in the chat, about this mix of experienced and younger diplomats. Is it a feasible scenario in general for Cecilia and in diplomacy for other colleagues to use experienced diplomats as trainers, to work with them, to involve them in preparing training for younger diplomats, which would possibly, the act of preparing this training could have a training role for themselves where they have to systematize and articulate their existing knowledge and then maybe create a foundation for further. And then the question for practitioners like Kishan and Stefano, have you seen this done in diplomatic services and has it worked well? So maybe Cecilia first, what do you think about this?
I think it can really work. It can really work. And I'm sorry, I was thinking about a training that it was a workplace training we made in the context for logisticians. So it's very different context. And it was very interesting because we really actually we worked on two levels. On a pedagogical level to support learning, and at the same time we were obliged to reorganize the activity to support the learning of people. I don't know if it's clear as an example for you, but for me it's to show that there is once you touch about workplace learning, you have to sometimes to reorganize the workplace itself. Sorry, I don't know if I'm answering to your question, Dejan. And I don't hear you anymore.
I think it answers it partly, to some extent, but I think it's more concretely, I'm just curious about using more senior, more experienced professionals as teachers and coaches formally for the young colleagues.
Yeah. So how to do it? That's your question.
Is it what does practice show? Is it a good approach?
In my experience, it works. It means that you have to set the conditions to do that, because what's difficult is that you have people that are coached in the field by more experienced people can feel evaluated on an HR point of view, not on a learning point of view. And this for me, it's very, very difficult to make safe, as you see what I mean.
Yes,
We have to.
And I think I understand better now. And the point of making the learning environment safe is very important. I know it from our practice at Diplo. This is one of the things we were always aiming for. And you can imagine in training diplomats, it can be sensitive. If you have a diplomat who's in a training program with diplomats from other countries, or he's not sure whether his boss is reading his discussion. So the safety of the learning environment is something that I understand. And I understand what you said. It links to what you said in your introduction, how to create an environment that is appropriate for a particular type of training. So if you want to use senior colleagues to train the younger ones, you really have to think about broader context and not just parachute them there without thinking about other consequences in terms of HR, in terms of safety.
Exactly. And you have to train these people too.
Yes, of course.
It's not because you are a manager that you are a very good mentor or a coach or a trainer or whatever. So in the organizations today, I don't know in diplomacy, but in the organizations, when you are a manager, you're like able to do anything because you are a manager. And sometimes I'm thinking about the psychological safety of management itself, that are obliged to be manager, coacher, HR, and so forth and so on. But they are not necessarily trained, not necessarily supported themselves to do that, to be leaders that can support their own staff. So we have to train these people to do this job.
I think that's an excellent point. And this is not something we always think about, but I think it's really important, especially the way you explain it now. I realize how important it is.
Something else on experienced versus unexperienced diplomats is discussion in the chat. And two comments I'd like to highlight from Stefano and Liz. Stefano says that he thinks that more experienced diplomats are extremely important for training purposes, but not for everything. Even required diplomatic skills are changing, and some new skills, think of social media and communication skills, cannot be properly taught by older or retired colleagues. And Liz says that she agrees with Stefano. If all your experienced diplomat trainers are former ambassadors, this can inhibit junior or younger diplomats. Some retired ambassadors from my service have forgotten what it was like to be its second secretary. Have you seen that, Diane or Cecilia, in your work, that sometimes it might not be a good idea to involve experienced or older staff members because they might be a little bit, they might not be able to place themselves in the shoes of the younger or less experienced diplomat or other practitioner?
You know, Dijan, if you want to answer, I can, if you want.
Go ahead, Cecilia.
Sure, but it's very linked to what we said before. It's not because you are experienced that you are able to share your experience. It's not something that go together. And there are some skills, social skills, that need to be improved sometimes. There are people that are more, how would you say, more able to share and have social skills that are useful to transmit learning and knowledge and skills, but there are some others that have more difficulties, and we don't have to forget that on the same time. So that's why for me it's always problematic to say that workplace learning is the answer, because this suppose that we have nothing to do. It's working is enough, being with people is enough to learn, and speak to people is enough to learn. In a certain way, can be, but the opposite can also be true if the person doesn't want to share their own experience, doesn't want to share their knowledge, doesn't want to share their skills. So there are some relationship skills, social skills that need to be developed to ensure transmission too. I don't know, Dejana, what you think about that.
No, I agree. And on the very practical side, I think it's important if you are in a role to organize or administer workplace learning, that you are empowered to impose certain standards. So one thing is to learn about the aspect that Cecilia is explaining, and to think, first to be aware, then to learn more yourself as an organizer, what are important aspects, and then to find ways to be empowered enough to impose those standards, even when you're trying to involve very senior people. I can imagine this being a problem with, you know, very senior diplomats who have power, charisma, all the other elements, but you need to be able to work with them very, very strongly. I think that's on a practical side challenge. Possibly Stefano has experienced some of this. I don't know.
I think something about that. We have a thesis that is being done here about surgical training on the job, and we see how experienced psychologists that are supposed to train people go through a process. They are idealized at the beginning from the young psychologist, and they need to be disinvested. I don't know if we say that, but they have to be able to let the young psychologists, or less experienced psychologists, to take their own way of doing. And this is quite difficult too for experienced people to see that young people or less experienced people are going to do things differently from what they did. And this too is on an identitary point of view, it's quite hard to be from some kind of people. I don't know if you have this experience, but
no, it's very clear, and it makes sense. I do have another question, more about the interplay between, for example, on-the-job learning and the differences between on-the-job learning and online learning, because it seems to be very different forms of education. The former related to responding to immediate experiences, and the latter maybe more indirect and mediated by computers and other devices. And I was wondering, maybe Diane can answer this, with the surge of new technologies and things like the Internet of Things, virtual reality, do you think that computers are able to generate some kind of on-the-job experience in some kind of simulated scenario that can get close to on-the-job learning even?
is Dijana? Is for him the question, I think.
Yes. Diana, it seems like you're muted.
Yes.
You can't hear me?
Yes.
And now we can.
Okay. Well, I think you can simulate things, they will always remain simulations. But consider this, lots of organizations today, and diplomatic services certainly, are distributed organizations. At any given time, about 50% at least of the staff of diplomatic service is posted abroad. So they are far away. They communicate just for performing their functions, apart from the functions in the host country where they have lots of face-to-face contact. Their communication and collaboration with their own ministry is mostly today through electronic means. In other sectors, in business and in humanitarian, in international development, organizations are distributed. They would have some of the development agencies around Europe. They would have maybe 20% of their staff in Europe, and then 80% staff in the developing countries worldwide. And their collaboration and communication is happening through electronic means. So if you organize training that is situated in their working practice, but is mediated by learning, it's not a simulation. It's the real thing. So it's not simple, there is no simple formula, but yes, I think that it's completely natural. It's not better or worse than other forms of learning. It's again, what both Cecilia and I agree on is the question of context. You analyze the context, you look at the situation, and you try to develop the best approach and format and method for given training. So I think the computers and internet are a huge enabler of on-the-job training today. If you don't approach from the technological point of view. One of the risks is lots of us are techno-optimists. We see a new gadget, we go buy the new device and think this is going to solve all the problems. So that should be avoided. But otherwise, it's a huge enabler for training.
Thank you, Dejan, and we will see in the future what kind of new technologies are going to emerge and going to help or not the learning experience. And maybe we will find whole new ways and whole new formats of learning that can be blended and interact with each other. We are nearing the end of the debate, and I'd like to thank all the participants for their very, very interesting inputs. And of course, I was not able to deal with all of your comments and questions, but a recording of this will be made available on the website, as well as a summary in which we can also summary the points made in the chat. Yeah, to quickly summarize what we have talked about, we have had quite a long discussion. We talked about the benefits of learning in the workplace, but also highlighting that this is not sufficient and that it always needs to be placed into a context. That was probably the resonating message of today. It needs to be adjusted to the context, and we need to pick a mix of different formats that work well together depending on the different needs that we have in our professional environment. Cecilia shared with us the 4 major learning modalities of workplace learning, as well as the main ingredients to make it into a success. And she warned us, very important, about the psychological safety that needs to be maintained, and the need for a safe workplace to share and learn from errors. And Dejan talked about the driving forces behind the changes in education, making a very interesting point. And he also shared Bloom's taxonomy of learning, which we will share on our website as well. And Diplo's experience as well, in creating communities of practice that can consist of very diverse set of participants. Then in addressing the questions and from our participants on here in the chat room, and some of the questions that we have received beforehand, it was the one message that came out of it is we need to be very careful to have one solution for every scenario and every context. When talking about sticks and carrots, this is again, it completely depends on the context in which the training would be held or the on-site learning would be conducted. We talked about mixing experienced and unexperienced people within one classroom, but also having experienced trainers, and we discussed the benefits and the challenges of it. And I think this sums up our discussion. If you have anything to add, please comment on the blog post that we're going to post about this web debate. And well, thank you for being with us today for this month debate, and we hope to see you next month for a new debate on a new topic. In the meantime, if you have any suggestions about relevant topics that you feel need to be discussed, please send an email to me or Mina. I can put the email addresses in the chat window. And then I hope to see you all in the chat room next month.
Thank you, Barbara. Thank you, Diane.
Thanks.
Have a very nice afternoon or evening or morning, depending where you are.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.